Hello, my name is John Burris. Thank you for joining me today for this short video. This video is called Fascia and Bone Health. In this leading edge video, I'll be explaining a lot of new information about how bones and fascia interact, and in order to have healthy bones, you need to first have healthy fascia. You know, most of us don't think much about our bones at all. We have 206 bones in the body, but unless we have a broken bone or we're in pain, we don't give it much thought. Well, bones are living tissue, just like muscles and other connective tissues. So in order to be healthy, the bones and the fascia have to be healthy together. And so we'll be explaining today how to keep your bones healthy and to have more vibrancy and life in your body. The health of your bones comes from many sources: your diet, your exercise, your glands and your hormones and whatnot. But also the fascia plays a key role in how healthy your bones are, and most people don't know that or give that much respect. So as a yoga teacher for over 30 years and a body worker for over 40 years, what I discovered is in order to have healthy bones, you need to have healthy fascia as well. If you haven't watched my video on what is fascia, it'll give you a primer if you go back and watch that, and it tells you much more in depth about what the fascia is in the body. But we'll give you a little bit overview here today and show you how bones and fascia interact. And in order to be healthy, you have to have healthy fascia in order to have healthy bones. In the last decade or so, many people, especially women, have been diagnosed with osteoporosis or osteopenia. And in my opinion, in my experience, a lot of that condition develops because the fascia that surrounds the bones is not healthy as well. So many medical people don't give the fascia much respect, but as I noticed and observed, the fascia having to be degenerated will also lead to bones having problems. So once again, in order to have healthy bones, your fascia needs to be healthy as well. You can think about the fascia of the body being like a loofah sponge that goes everywhere in the body. And here's that picture of the loofah sponge, how it has all these intricate little caves and caverns. So that would be the fascia of the body. It travels to every corner of the body, and it goes from the tips of your toes to the top of your head, then it wraps around the bones and all the other tissues as well. So let's talk a little bit about bone first. Bone is a type of connective tissue. It's actually very watery. It's 25 to 30% liquid, and that gives it the ability to basically change shape a lot. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it's got minerals in it like calcium, magnesium, but fascia is what covers around it. For example, all bone has a membrane around it. It's called a periosteum, and it's a fascia tissue, and these interact to create health and vitality and also change the shape of the bone. So fascia runs through the body and it covers every bone and all the tissues and whatnot. So if this is your entire body here, basically it's wrapped in these layers of fascia that go everywhere. And they wrap all the bones, called the periosteum, and it's the fascia that holds you up. I'll talk to you later about that. It's not the spine holding you up. The fascia is what actually holds you up. So fascia and bones interact, they cover each other, and they create this magical relationship that we'll talk about. Since bone has a high water content, bone will change shape. So for example, this gentleman here, he has bowed legs. Could be from riding a horse a lot or other factors, but when the fascia tugs on the bone enough, it changes the shape of the bone because the bone has a high water density to it. It's not solid. It's very flexible and shapeable. So fascia tugging on bone will cause it to change shape. In this case, it's causing bowed legs. And here's a very interesting part about bones. So remember that fascia surrounds bones, and fascia connects the bone to the muscle and to the tendon. So fascia is also the pathway for nutrients to get to the bone. So for example here, in this picture here, we have what's called osteoblast cells, which build bone. And on this side we have osteoclast cells, which take away old dead bone. Those cells travel through the fascia, get to the bone. So that's one of the unique relationships that go on, is nutrients get to the bone through the fascia network. So when somebody says, oh, I just tore my muscle off my bone, they did not do that. That's an inaccurate statement. That would be more accurate to say, I tore the fascia off the bone, because muscle does not attach to bone. Fascia attaches to the bone. So there's this delicate balance going on all the time. So remember that bone is living tissue. It needs to be constantly broken down with osteoclasts taking away the dead bone, osteoblasts building new bone. So it's constantly recycling itself. And the fascia that surrounds the bone is one of the ways that these cells get to the bone, and also nutrition and minerals get to the bone as well. So a healthy bone is reflected in healthy fascia that surrounds the bone. These two need each other. For example, if you have an injury, for example, and you break your bone, and somehow you remove the fascia, it's going to be very difficult for the bone to regrow and be healthy without the fascia. You're taking away the pathway or the nutrition. But if the fascia is present, then it's easier for the bone to regrow because it has nutrition and minerals getting to it. So a lot of times what I find in my bodywork practice is somebody has a broken bone and they put a cast on it, and then years later they're still in pain and they still have all kinds of dysfunction in here because most therapeutic situations don't address the fascia. So what I have to do is take my hands and start to stretch the fascia tissue because it's hard, rigid, and dried out because it hasn't been addressed. It's still traumatized, and the bone isn't getting the nutrition it needs. So in order to cure actually a broken bone, you've got to not just put a bone in a cast, you also have to address the fascia that surrounds the bone, which is the pathway to nutrients. So there's a very important symbiotic relationship that goes on between fascia and bone. They need each other to stay healthy. And here's another important concept to consider. We often think about the skeleton or all the bones holding us upright. That's called old anatomy. That's not actually how the body works. Your skeleton does not hold you up. There's no capacity to lift you up and hold you up. Your skeleton is just there so the fascia can anchor onto, and it's the tension in the fascia that holds you up, not the bones themselves. So this is a gravity model based on old anatomy that's hundreds of years old. Your skeleton and your bones do not hold you upright. It's the tension in the fascia anchoring to the bones that keep us upright. So we're not a gravity model, as the skeleton suggests. We're what's called a tensegrity model, which is based on tension. So the fascia running through the body in all directions, connecting to the bones themselves, creates tension, and that tension lifts us up. It creates mobility and length and space. It's not based on gravity. It's not based on bones holding up. It's based on the fascia and tension anchoring to the bones that actually lifts us up and holds us upright. So it's a whole unique concept that's based on new anatomy. Here's a really important model I want to share with you. We'll get into a bigger diagram here in a second. Shows you the relationship between the muscle, tendon, fascia, and bone. So over here, we have the muscle tissue, and these green fibers here are muscle tissue, and they're surrounded by fascia. The fascia embeds and surrounds
the muscle tissue, and the fascia continues, and here it becomes a tendon. So the fascia still is there, and it surrounds the tendon. And then the fascia travels all the way to the bone and creates the periosteum around the bone, which is the lining we already talked about. So then there's these holes in the bone called the trabeculae. There are blood vessels that go through those holes to nourish the inside of the bone, here called the endosteum. But also the fascia travels through those holes and creates the inside lining of the bone. So the endosteum inside is created by fascia, and the periosteum on the outside is created by the fascia. It's as if your entire body is floating in a sea of fascia. This is one way I like to envision the body. If the fascia travels through the muscle, it travels through the tendon, it travels in and around the outside of the bone called the periosteum, it travels inside to the bone called the endosteum, then it must mean that the bones are just floating in a sea of fascia. And it's the fascia called tensegrity which is holding us up. The tensegrity fascia here being the red, and the white part being the bones. So your bones aren't holding you up. So all the layers of fascia are in and around the bones that are keeping us upright. That's new anatomy. It's very different than old anatomy. This is the picture of old anatomy, where we were taught to believe that our bones are holding us up. It's based on a column model, that our bodies are just columns based on gravity being held up by bones stacked on top of each other. This is not actually how the body works. And this is new anatomy, where the fascia creates tension, called tensegrity, and the fascia anchored to the bones lifts us up, and we're fluid and we're mobile. We're not based on gravity or a gravity model or stacks of blocks. We are a tension model because the fascia is in and around the bones, lifting us up all the time.
So let me share with you this very unique model and show you how fascia and bone interact. So this green strip here is the fascia running through the body. And this is the bone right here. So right here, this is the muscle fibers. So muscle fibers are maybe hundreds or thousands of them all bundled together to form a bicep or a tricep or a pec muscle. And those fibers are all embedded in fascia. So when you build muscle, you're either building more, creating more muscle fibers, they're called myofibrils, or you're expanding the ones that you already created, but they're surrounded and embedded in the fascia tissue. So once you leave the muscle, the fascia continues, and now you have a tendon. So the difference is muscle fibers will contract and relax, contract and relax, contract and relax. Tendons don't have the ability to do that. They're going to be a little stronger, so they have more collagen in them to create a firmer attachment, because the tendon now is going to continue through the fascia. The fascia surrounds and envelopes the tendon, and it continues to here and attaches to the bone, and then it wraps around the bone and becomes the outside of the bone called the periosteum. So when your muscles here are contracting, they pull the fascia through the tendon, and the tendon pulls on the bone. So this is really important. In order to be healthy, the bone needs some tension. So when you do muscle activity, lifting weights, you're contracting your muscle, you're pulling on the bone, you're stimulating the bone to grow. However, what happens with most people, and this is why we're in the wrong type of anatomy, I call it old anatomy, because when you tighten your muscles all the time, strength training, fitness, workouts, you shorten everything, and you shorten and you harden and you dry out the fascia. And you dry out the fascia leading to the bone, so the bone does not receive the nutrition it needs because you have dried, shortened, basically damaged fascia tissue. And see, here's the other thing that happens here. The periosteum is the outside of the bone. So if we remove that, we're going to look inside, and the fascia travels through the bone and becomes the endosteum inside the bone. So the outside of the bone and the inside of the bone are all fascia tissue, and this is where the white and red blood cells are created inside. So for healthy bones, you need healthy fascia. When your bones are surrounded by unhealthy fascia that's dried out from lots of reasons, stress is one reason. Also, too much fitness will cause the fascia to dry out, and now you don't receive nutrition and minerals to the bone to feed it. That's why I'll talk about in a minute here how I believe yoga is a much better healing and maintenance practice than a fitness practice, because in yoga you're creating healthy muscles, but you're also creating healthy fascia. In the fitness world, you might be building muscle tissue, but you're causing your fascia to dry out, shrink, and weather. And now you're surrounding the bone with a dried out, shrunken, dilapidated tissue where nutrition cannot come to the bone. So this is the relationship that goes on. Fascia travels through the muscle tissue, through the tendons, wraps around the bone, goes inside the bone, creates the inside called the endosteum. For the bone to be healthy, the surrounding fascia needs to be healthy as well. So once again, in order for this entire system to be healthy, we need some tensile strength pulling. So we do need muscle activity because it pulls on the bone. However, too much of it causes dried out fascia, which causes the bone not to receive the nutrition it wants. So we all know that a sedentary life might not be good for us, but also a severe fitness life might not be good for our bones either, because they're causing your fascia to dry out. Most people begin life as a grape or they die as a raisin because their fascia dries out for lots of reasons. And that's not a good thing. Nutrients aren't able to get to where they're needed here in the body. So when I hear a lot of people who are older, I see them swimming or in the gym lifting weights, and they say, oh, I've been diagnosed with a bone condition. My doctor says I need to do weight bearing and strength bearing exercises and running and aerobics and whatnot. They're partially right and they're mostly wrong, because the bone does need some kind of muscle activity to pull on the bone to create stimulation for growth. Yet, in the long run, they're drying out their fascia. And they're making itself worse, because now the bone does not receive any nutrition because you've got dry, dead fascia surrounding the bone because of all of the strenuous fitness. And here's another aspect of how this works. So a tendon will attach a muscle to a bone. A ligament attaches a bone to a bone. So here's one bone, and here's another bone, and here's the ligament. So here's the ligament in between, and that keeps the joint intact. Here's the problem. That ligament is surrounded and embedded in fascia tissue. So here's what I see happening often, especially with athletes, especially with baseball pitchers. They don't stretch enough, they don't do yoga, they don't do fascia body work, so their ligament tears because they're too hard, they're too tight, they're too stiff. So they tear the ligament because they're tearing the fascia in and around here because they're too stiff and too tight, because their hard body has dried out. And here's a really important distinction. If all you do is practice fitness, the hard body concept, you're hardening your muscles and you're drying out your fascia, because your fascia surrounds the muscles.
the tendons or ligaments, you're drying out, shortening, and weakening the bones because you're creating dried out fascia that surrounds the bones. And here's a very big distinction here. When you're practicing yoga, you're getting your strength, but you're expanding your muscles and your fascia, leading to healthier bones because you're not drying out the fascia around the bones, leading into the bones. You're creating something called thixotropy, where the fascia starts to melt and expand like taffy warming, so it stays healthier, more nutrition can come to the bones, and you don't dry out. So fascia, in my experience, is a much better way to keep your body healthy and to repair any kind of bone issues you might have, because it's keeping your body liquid, strong, and flexible at the same time.
While Western exercises like fitness, gym workouts focus primarily on strength training, with yoga you get so much more, and your fascia is so much healthier. So for example, there's something called chi, or life force energy, that moves through the body, and it travels through the fascia. If you haven't watched my video yet on the energetics of fascia, you may want to go back and watch that video. So the fascia is the pathway for this chi to flow through the body. When the fascia is liquid and flexible and open, the fascia travels unimpeded through the body, and it's a river of life. It's called life force energy. It's called chi. When the fascia dries out, as in stress or too much muscle work or fitness training, it starts to impede the flow of chi, so all of a sudden it stops flowing. It can't flow anymore because there's no pathway. So when the chi stops flowing, your bones don't get energetic nutrients, because not only does the bone need living physical nutrition, it also needs life force chi. And your fascia hardens and dries out, the chi in the body won't get to the bone. So now your bones will have negative health consequences because your fascia has dried out. So in my experience, practicing yoga is such a better option than a fitness practice to keep your bones healthy, because not only are you getting real living nutrition to the bones, you're getting life force energy, chi, to the bones as well, which is just as important. And we in the Western culture don't understand that very well, but your bones and all the tissues of the body need life force. They need chi to stay alive and healthy, and hard, dried out fascia won't do that. It prevents the chi from flowing to the bones.
And here's another interesting aspect to consider how the fascia and bone connect here. Here's a picture of a heel spur where the circle is. So the fascia, the periosteum around the bone is too tight, and it's pulling away from the bone. So the bone's infinite wisdom is saying, oh, well, let's fill in that space with more bone material because we need to protect it. So when you have tight muscles, it creates tight fascia, and the fascia often pulls away from the bone, and it gets filled in with extra calcium and other minerals to create a heel spur or a spur anywhere else. So anytime you have a spur anywhere in your body, whether it's the shoulder or the back along the spine or in the heel, it's because the fascia is too tight, and it pulls on the bone and often pulls away from the bone, and the bone will fill in that space with extra minerals.
And I see this all the time with athletes, how they tear their Achilles tendon in the back of their heel and calf. Well, that's because the fascia is too tight. The fascia being too tight from all the fitness, the running, the jumping, and training will shorten and dry out. And where it pulls onto the bone, as we showed you in the model before, it starts to tear because they have too tight a fascia pulling into the bone, because most athletes don't stretch enough, most athletes don't do fascia body work, and most athletes don't stretch enough or do yoga. because they're more interested in strength rather than flexibility. So the reason those Achilles tendons tear is because the fascia has dried out and pulled into the bone, and now it's hard, brittle tissue. A flexible body will bend. A hard body will break. Most athletes have embraced the hard body concept, so that's why they tear and they break so much. So there you have it. That's our unique bone-fascia relationship. The bones and the fascia need each other. Most people don't give the fascia any respect and just assume the bones fail by themselves. When the fascia is unhealthy, meaning dried out and brittle and lacking vitality and life force, then the bones will suffer. And in a comprehensive, integrative approach, in order to heal the bones, you need to heal the fascia. The way I've done that is through fascia body work, often massage therapy with Swedish massage, lots of yoga and stretching. That's what I would recommend in order to have healthy bones, because the bones are the pathway for nutrition. The fascia is the pathway for the bones to receive nutrition, and they need each other. And most people don't give them any respect. They just assume it's a bone problem. So that's what I see happening. I hope that helps share some new ideas with you in this Leading Edge video series. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about me, please visit my website at johnburris.com. You can also subscribe to my video here, and you will receive information on my next video to come. Thank you.